Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Weather Center Nazario. Today is November 3rd, 2023, and happy Friday. We are officially rolling into the first weekend of November. Now, I will honestly go ahead and throw this disclaimer out immediately. I did not think I'd be making another tropical update video, but you know what? There's a couple things I'm noticing on a few different model platforms, especially today at 12 Zoo, that I want to go ahead and talk about and get out into open air immediately because we are going to have to monitor as we finish up the next 28 days of the hurricane season. That being said, I'm not entirely confident that this is exactly what's going to play out, but I do think that the Southern Caribbean may need to at least investigate the possibility we could see another tropical disturbance down there, at least based on the dynamics that I'm seeing, but we can't rule out the possibility of tropical cyclone formation during the middle portions of November, and I'll show you exactly what it is that I'm looking at that leads me to believe that we might want to just keep one eye open or looking over our shoulder just in case the hurricane season decides to come back one last time for a quick resurrection. Now, first things first, we're looking at our infrared satellite for most of the Atlantic, the Southeast United States, and especially Central America, because you can see quite a high level of precip and thunderstorm activity working its way into Central America and the Yucatan Peninsula especially. Belize, Honduras, and Nicaragua are currently under the threat for some flash flooding, as remnants of Invest 97L still highlighted in Invest. I'm not too sure why. The Invest itself is down over here where I have my little pink X drawn. A lot of the main thunderstorm activity, the extreme thunderstorm activity responsible for a large majority of the potential flooding we're seeing out there surging back over the Cayman Islands and into Cuba even for that matter, is actually the interaction between that tropical moisture that's been entrenched down across the Caribbean Sea, buttoned right up against that frontal system you can see in the high-level cloud cover on our infrared satellite imagery, trying to trudge just a little bit further to the south and southeast, and as a response, because of that convergent flow and that convergent air mass at the surface, we're seeing all that rising air rapidly along that leading edge of modified cool air button up against the warm air rising on that frontal axis, and that's why we have some tremendous thunderstorm activity firing out there, as well as leftover vorticity associated with that 97L Invest that we thought was going to blow up into our next hurricane. Now, I'm going to tell you right now, whether or not Invest 97L holds together as an organized Invest or not moving across Central America, we are going to see a prolonged precipitation event, and I'm seeing some of the models predicting we could see between 8 to 10 inches of rain, especially for coastal locations of Belize, Nicaragua, and Honduras, as a lot of that onshore flow tries to march its way further inland and induce even more flooding than you guys have already had to deal with down in that area. I've been watching pretty much all hurricane season long, and I want to say since about the mid to late September timeframe, you guys have been underneath what looks to be a Central American gyre on and off, of course, with widespread thunderstorm activity helping to induce lots of different isolated instances of flooding and especially the landslides and the mudslides. So unfortunately, it looks like you're not out of the woods just yet of seeing some severe weather action from all that activity down there, and I do think the flood threat is going to persist, especially if you happen to live along one of the coastal regions of those aforementioned countries. Now, before we go any further, I want to go ahead and highlight right now that I'm actually looking out over northern South America, particularly Colombia, Venezuela, and Guyana out there, because it looks like what could possibly send another low pressure area in the Southern Caribbean spinning is how our low level flow sets up across those countries and an extension of the East Pac monsoonal trough that may try to show itself with a little bit of the residual moisture coming out of the southern MDR. You can see on satellite imagery a lot of good tropical moisture still down there, surging to the north and trying to affect some of our locations down there in Trinidad, Tobago, the lower Windward Islands, reaching out into Barbados. It looks like right now we have some thunderstorm activity just off to your west. All right, so we're going to get right in. This is exactly what I was talking about. We're looking at our North Atlantic AOI, but I want you to pay close attention to what's going on down there over South America, okay? We're already halfway through the run. This is November 10th at 0Z. You can already see a pretty widespread indication that we're going to have a good amount of East Pac moisture surging into the northern portions of South America, as well as some pretty good tropical moisture coming out of the main development region of our Atlantic. It still looks like we may have a bit of an intertropical convergence zone, but the convergent wind flow is more or less down over in this general area just off the southwest coast of Africa, or I should say the west coast of the African peninsula. I know it's a little deceiving looking at this AOI in particular, but as that continues and we get those prevailing easterlies pushing that moisture across South America and into the Caribbean, look at how on November 11th and into the 12th, a lot of this stuff starts to come not only off of South America, but also out of the MDR, taking a lot of that moisture with it, and out of that East Pac with the extension of the monsoonal trough out there, forming into a consolidated low pressure system moving to the north. I'm not going to go any further than that. I'm simply going to go ahead and show you guys what parameters I'm looking at in terms of the large scale environment that could support a low forming. Not going ahead and going gung-ho with the GFS GFS calling for a hurricane. As we learned with Invest 97L, anything's possible, and there's going to be a lot of unfavorable conditions as well that could suppress any tropical development. Just looking at this chart right here, as a matter of fact, as we get another frontal system coming down off the United States, look at all this dry air pretty much tapping the environment of any kind of relative humidity or precipitable water for that matter. This is our precipitable water chart, but it is equivalent to looking at a relative humidity chart. It's going to identify more or less the same thing. So you can definitely delineate between where all of our copious dry air coming off the continental U.S. into the Gulf is expected to run up against this system down there in the Caribbean. So you could argue it either way. You can make a case for some favorable conditions setting up. You could also make a case saying it's impossible at this point because of how full-fledged of a fall season we have occurring over North America. Just to further reinforce my case, we're now up to 500 millibars so we can look at our vorticity chart. We're starting the chart on November 6th. This is the following Monday, because you could see that there is an anticyclone out there over the central Atlantic that's trying to hurl some leftover vorticity out in towards the Caribbean general vicinity. As such, as you take this through time, you could see that with that trough coming in to run right up against that anticyclone out over the Atlantic, we're going to see that system start to recede and broaden out, which is going to allow some extra vorticity to work its way across the MDR using that prevailing easterly flow. If you look down over where the eastern Pacific monsoonal trough is, as well as all those thunderstorms that we've been having in South America, both induced by general daytime instability as well as the leftover vorticity that helped to spawn not only disturbance 97L, but the previous highlighted disturbance down there in the central Caribbean, a lot of the same parameters are still in play. And now it's just a matter of whether or not we're going to get that opportunity to see that vorticity consolidate, as you can see here, by November 12th and spin up into an organized tropical cyclone. This is where things get a little interesting, and I've been watching this over the last few days, and the Euro and the GFS alike have been very consistent in this department. If you look right around the same time frame, this is our Euro 200 millibar potential velocity anomaly, right around that same time, starting at about the November 11th time frame, going all the way through to the 1st of December, you can see that a large majority of our Caribbean AOR is actually anticipated to be a favorable setup for tropical disturbance or tropical cyclone consolidation and organization. If you take a look down below here, you can see that that area of upward vertical motion or rising air, the actual velocity anomalies, line up perfectly with where our models are thinking that there is a chance for development down in there in the Caribbean. Once again, adding fuel to the fire, another piece of the puzzle. I've been looking at this as well since last weekend, as a matter of fact. If you go all the way out to the back end of the loop at 192 hours, right at the same time, November 11th, look at the timestamp, guys, you're seeing that tropical depression formation probabilities go up, and then eventually through the roof as you get to the tail end of this run, up to about a 45% chance now that tropical depression formation is likely. If you cross-check this with our 12Z yesterday, you can see that there was an incremental increase as you go 240 hours, 264 hours, and in 288 hours, there's about a 35-40% chance there. And when you come back to the 0Z, you can see that we have a small cluster of now 45% down there. So the Euro ensembles are definitely pinging on what the GFS and the Canadian model, for that matter, are highlighting down there in the very extreme most southern Caribbean. Last but not least, we're going to go to the GFS ensembles, because I do openly admit I trust the ensembles more than I do the deterministic run. And as you go through the ensembles, you can see that we have a sudden surge in overall probabilities and agreement that we could see a low pressure area starting again at that same time. If you look at the timestamp, guys, this is 12Z on November 11th. So November 11th is going to be the overarching theme of this video and the time frame that I want us to keep a close eye out down there in terms of what tries to take shape. If it's going to be tropical thunderstorm activity trying to form a low pressure, or a full-fledged named system for the end of hurricane season, November 11th is going to be the deadline. You take this through all the way to the back end of the loop, and look at how many ensemble members for the 12 Zulu GFS we have, highlighting the chance of something sneaking up out of there. Now, it looks like this is primarily going to be a threat for Cayman Islands, Cuba, Jamaica, Dominican Republic, and the Bahamas. Doesn't seem like anything's going to reach as far east as Puerto Rico, and it doesn't seem like we're going to have an opportunity to see something come into the Gulf of Mexico, let alone affect the state of Florida, because at the same time this is happening, we are expecting another El Nino style system and another very, very strong frontal boundary, for that matter, to be coming off the southeast coastline of the U.S. That being said, let's take a look at our 0Z Euro. Right now, the 12Z Euro is populating, so I'm not going to pull that up because we cannot see to the end of the loop. But if you look at our 0Z European model, you can see if you watch, not necessarily over the Caribbean this time, I want you guys fixating off the coast of Texas in the western Gulf of Mexico. As we have all that frontal interaction going on and the jet surges to the south, encounters that subtropical jet that's still been marinating over the Gulf of Mexico pretty much through the entire portion of this second half of the hurricane season. As that interaction takes place, you can see a surge in moisture down there as well. Here comes our next very potent and aggressive frontal system, for that matter, spinning up what looks to be a potential low-pressure center out there over the Gulf that could hopefully not only alleviate the drought conditions we have going on along the Gulf Coast, but also give us our next full-fledged El Nino storm system across the deep south and eventually surging into the southeast. Cross-check both of these areas of influence with the Canadian model now. This is our 12Z Canadian model, and you immediately go towards the back end of the run, you can see the same level of agreement for something trying to take shape over South Texas, parts of Mexico, and then moving off to the east and northeast as it begins to develop into a full-fledged low-pressure center. You also take a look down over the Caribbean, and there's a lot of available moisture down there with a few different low-pressure stamps indicated by the Canadian model. So once again, we do have a setup for a tropical cyclone to form. Whether or not it's going to execute it like we saw with 97L or the environmental parameters change remains to be seen. We are still a little ways away, but again, if I go back in time just a little bit to November 11th, you can already see that we're starting to see that precipitable moisture increase down there over the Caribbean. Same timestamp as our Euro and GFS guys, so it goes without saying we're starting to see the consistency lining up once again. Last but not least, before we close out the video, we're looking at our Euro ensemble control mean cell level pressure product. So this is your most likely outcome when you take all of our European ensemble members and put them together and find the mean average or the highest level of agreement between all of our 51 ensemble members. This is what is most likely to occur according to the Euro. I want to see what 12Z shows as well. You track this quickly through time and you can see that off the coast of Texas, there is that low pressure beginning to form up. And as it continues to deepen down, it transitions off to the east and eventually the northeast, developing into 1,005 millibar low pressure off the coast of South and North Carolina, moving further and further to the north and deepening into our next major frontal system for that matter, potentially impacting the mid-Atlantic states in the northeast as well. One area of note, if you look out at the same time on the Euro, we don't have a whole lot of agreement down there in the Caribbean that we're going to see any sort of low pressure system form. So you see down there in the southern Caribbean, we do have lower pressures, which could be indicative of instability and rising air if something were to try to form up down there. But all in all, the ensembles do not agree, at least at 0Z, that anything is going to try to consolidate and take on the shape of a closed low-pressure center. So some disagreement, some agreement across all of our model platforms, guys. It goes without saying we are in a very volatile point of the hurricane season. A lot of different environmental factors out there in terms of just looking at hot water and rising air. You also have to take into account wind shear, the continuous amounts of dry air and polar air, for that matter, coming off of North America, headed down into that general source region, and the subtropical jet being an El Nino setup currently, albeit it has been turned off for quite some time, trying to help influence the level of wind shear and dry air that can get down into the southern Caribbean. So I wish I had a more concrete answer to you guys, but right now it's literally a toss-up. You can make a firm argument that nothing is likely to happen for the remainder of hurricane season, and you could actually stand on a decent-sized pedestal and make a case that something could possibly happen before hurricane season closes out on November 30th. So I wanted to get all that information out to you guys. I wanted to just show you what it is that I'm seeing in the trends, just in case anything does try to sneak up on us. I'm not going one way or the other. I'm still fairly confident because of the amount of wind shear and dry air moving in out there. We won't see anything significant take place, but it goes without saying our models are trying to say something different, so we're going to continue to investigate. Thank you so much for joining me on this glorious Friday afternoon, guys. It is approaching the 3 o'clock time frame here in Central Florida. I'm really excited to start the weekend on a high note with that cyclogenesis we're still expecting off the southeastern coastline. Saturday may be a little rainy, a little wet for us in southeastern Florida and along the eastern periphery of the east coast of Florida, but all in all, Sunday is definitely looking phenomenal in terms of weather activity. So if you want to get out and enjoy the sun, enjoy what leftover of the cool air we have down here in the southeast, definitely do so. Definitely have fun with your friends and family, guys. I highly encourage it. We'll see you tonight at our 8 p.m. Tropics Talk, where we'll have all of our afternoon model data in to discuss exactly what could possibly be going on down in the Caribbean. But until then, guys, you know this saying. This is Weather Center Nazario, signing out.